The year was 1099, and the world was on the cusp of a monumental change. The Great Crusade, launched by Pope Urban II in 1095, was nearing its culmination. An army of knights, peasants, and soldiers from all over Christendom had marched across Europe, driven by faith, the promise of salvation, and the ambition to reclaim the holy city of Jerusalem from Muslim rule. Their mission? To capture Jerusalem and secure it for Christianity, making it the focal point of Christendom once again. But as they approached the ancient city in the summer of 1099, they faced challenges that none had foreseen: hunger, disease, fierce opposition, and a divine test of their resolve. The Crusaders, numbering around 15,000 to 30,000 soldiers, had already endured incredible hardships. The long march from Europe to the Levant had been filled with conflict, treachery, and long stretches of desert. Many had died of disease, starvation, or simply the brutality of the journey. They crossed the Byzantine Empire, captured Antioch after a bloody siege, and now, with Jerusalem within their sights, the soldiers felt the weight of their purpose. For them, this was not just a military campaign, it was a divine mission. Jerusalem was the spiritual heart of Christianity, home to the sacred sites that Jesus Christ had walked, lived, died, and risen again. To reclaim the city was to fulfill God's will. But as the Crusaders approached Jerusalem in early June 1099, their initial fervor began to wane. They found themselves confronting a massive challenge, not only from the fortified city, but also from the harsh realities of the landscape. Jerusalem, surrounded by formidable walls, was no easy target. The soldiers, exhausted and sick, faced an overwhelming task. Jerusalem was a city steeped in history, revered by three major religions: Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. The city had been under Muslim control since 638 AD, when the Caliph Umar ibn al-Khattab had entered the city in peace. By 1099, the city was under the rule of the Fatimid Caliphate, with the Muslim forces led by the city's governor, Iftikhar ad-Dawla. Jerusalem was not just a religious symbol, it was a fortress. The city walls, built and reinforced over centuries, were high and strong, with strategic gates that could be easily defended. Inside the city, the Muslim defenders were not alone. There were also Jewish communities living in the city who had been under Muslim rule for generations. Despite the Muslim presence, the Christians were adamant that they had the divine right to reclaim the holy city, regardless of who was ruling it at the time. As the Crusaders arrived, the city had already been fortified and prepared for a siege. The defenders, numbering around 5,000, were led by a commander named Al-Afdal, who had experience in defending cities from attacks. The Christians, however, had something that the Muslims did not: an overwhelming determination driven by faith and the hope of salvation. The Crusaders laid siege to Jerusalem on June 7, 1099. They surrounded the city, setting up camps and preparing for what was expected to be a lengthy siege. Their first challenge came almost immediately: the lack of resources. The Crusaders had been marching for months and were running low on food, water, and supplies. Disease spread like wildfire through the ranks, with many soldiers succumbing to fever, dysentery, and other ailments. The surrounding area offered little to sustain the Crusader army, and the food supplies dwindled as the days wore on. For the Crusaders, the siege was a test of endurance. They built siege towers, trebuchets, and other machines of war, hoping to breach the city's towering walls. However, their efforts seemed futile against the resilient defenders. The defenders, on the other hand, watched from the ramparts, waiting for an opportunity to launch a counterattack. The tension in the air was palpable, as both sides were locked in a war of attrition, each trying to wear down the other. Despite the dire circumstances, the Crusaders did not give up. They continued to pray, believing that their mission was divinely ordained and that victory would come through God's grace. For the leaders of the crusade, including Godfrey of Bouillon, Raymond IV of Toulouse, and Bohemond of Taranto, there was no turning back. They were determined to carry out their mission, even at the cost of their lives. After weeks of frustrating stalemate, a miracle, at least according to the Crusaders, seemed to occur. On June 13, 1099, the Crusaders managed to bring a fleet of ships and soldiers to the shores of the Mediterranean Sea, securing a vital supply line. This allowed them to bring in fresh resources and reinforcements. With newfound hope, they redoubled their efforts to breach the city's walls. The Crusaders built siege engines, launched numerous assaults on the gates, and used their heavy war machines to batter the walls. The defenders inside the city, meanwhile, were beginning to show signs of strain. Despite their best efforts, the defenders could not stop the Crusaders from inching closer to the walls. With each passing day, the Crusader forces grew more determined. Finally, on July 14th, after a month of siege, the Crusaders made their final push. They broke through the walls at a crucial location, allowing them to flood into the city. As the Crusaders poured into the city, what followed was one of the most brutal and infamous massacres in history. The Crusaders had promised their followers that Jerusalem would be a place of salvation for the Christian faithful, but for the Muslims and Jews living within the city, it was anything but. The Crusaders, motivated by religious zeal, showed no mercy. In their minds, they were carrying out God's will. They slaughtered the city's defenders, including men, women, and children. Jewish residents were either killed or driven into the city's great synagogue, where they were burned alive. The Crusaders didn't just kill in the heat of battle, they hunted down civilians in the streets, dragging them from their homes and executing them on the spot. The bloodshed was unrelenting. The streets of Jerusalem ran red with the blood of the fallen, as the Crusaders, their faces streaked with dirt and sweat, massacred anyone they could find. One contemporary chronicler, Raymond of Aguilas, reported that the Crusaders killed so many that the blood reached up to their horses' bridles. The city, once a vibrant melting pot of religious and cultural diversity, was now a charnel house. The leaders of the Crusaders, including Godfrey of Bouillon, did not intervene to stop the bloodshed. They were too caught up in the fervor of their mission, convinced that they were carrying out a divine task. Even the promise of salvation and the sanctity of the holy sites could not prevent the slaughter. It was only after the killing subsided that Godfrey, as the new ruler of the city, entered the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, offering thanks to God for their victory. But for the inhabitants of Jerusalem, the cost of this victory was immense. With the fall of Jerusalem, the Crusaders had succeeded in their goal. They had captured the holy city and secured it for Christendom. But the consequences of this success would echo for centuries. The massacre of Jerusalem sent shockwaves through the Muslim and Jewish worlds. In the years that followed, the Crusaders would hold on to Jerusalem, but the city would not remain peaceful for long. The victory had set the stage for more conflict, as Muslim forces, led by the legendary commander Saladin, would begin their own efforts to recapture the city. The First Crusade, and particularly the Siege of Jerusalem, would be remembered as one of the most brutal chapters in medieval history. For the Crusaders, it was a holy triumph of victory for Christianity that had come at an unimaginable cost. For the Muslims and Jews, it was a catastrophe that marked the beginning of centuries of warfare over control of Jerusalem. In the years that followed, the city would remain a point of conflict. The legacy of the Siege of Jerusalem would haunt both sides, as they grappled with the question of who truly owned the city and whether any human force could truly lay claim to something so sacred. The Siege of Jerusalem and the First Crusade had far-reaching consequences, not just for the inhabitants of the city, but for the entire Christian, Muslim, and Jewish worlds. The events that transpired in 1099 would shape the course of history for centuries to come. It would set the stage for further crusades, the rise of powerful Muslim leaders like Saladin, and the eventual establishment of the Ottoman Empire. But beyond the military and political ramifications, the Siege of Jerusalem remains a stark reminder of the dangers of religious zealotry, the human cost of war, and the complexities of faith. It was a moment when men believed they were acting in the name of God, but the true cost of their actions was a blood-soaked city, torn apart by violence, hatred, and the ambition for power. Enduring consequences of unchecked zeal. The Siege of Jerusalem serves as a stark reminder that the pursuit of power, especially when fueled by religious fervor, can lead to devastating consequences for all involved. It highlights the complexities of human nature, the capacity for both great faith and extreme violence, for unity and division. The scars left by this event continue to shape the city's history, serving as a poignant symbol of the delicate balance between devotion and destruction. As we reflect on this tragic chapter, We are reminded of the need for tolerance, understanding, and the recognition that true peace cannot be achieved through force or fanaticism, but through compassion and mutual respect for all peoples and faiths.